Um, I'm going to talk about scaling green businesses through capital. Um, and here's the general overview. We're going to talk about some funding considerations up front, and then talk about different sources of funding, grants, debt, and equity. And I wanted to put the funding sources up front or funding considerations up front. I think last time we did a similar presentation, we put them after the discussion, but I think it's important to just sort of pose some questions up front as you think about funding and financing your business. And to, one question is whether or not you need or want financing. Sometimes it's assumed, and that's not always wrong. I mean, I think a lot of businesses do need financing, but when you bring in financing, what type of financing you bring in, these are important questions and important issues. So you do have lots of examples of successful businesses that grow organically without external financing. And then even more examples, you can find where they put out off external financing till they were more mature, or put it off until they used just debt, for example, and didn't bring in equity. There are huge companies that are still family owned, and that's a great example of companies that didn't go public and have all the pressures that come along with that. So and there are lots of issues, that drive these questions. One is cost controls and cash flow management. You can use these to help, control your need for external financing. One of them, which is an issue I encountered a lot with clients in the venture capital world, was just negotiating better contract terms. You're a small business, you're supplying goods or services to customers potentially, or also to larger businesses. If you're not taking deposits and sort of upfront, milestone payments or kickoff payments from those customers, you're essentially financing them, right? Because you're making the investment to produce your good or service before they paid you anything. Um, a lot of startups or smaller companies will be hesitant, I think, to even start that discussion. They'll be so excited to get a contract, right? They don't want to have a conversation about, hey, can we get better payment terms? But it's definitely worth asking at least. You don't have to play hardball, but at least asking if you can get better payment terms, and that obviously, reduces your need for financing. There also, we'll talk about some of these different sort of crowdfunding options or pre-sales, Kickstarter type platforms. So if you can pre-sell goods or services, that essentially is a form of financing. But you're not giving up ownership of the company. You're not paying interest on that. Typically, I mean, you might offer a discount, so you could argue you are paying some fee for that. But that's another creative way to sort of reduce your need for financing. Every source of financing or funding has some strings attached, so you've got to sort of analyze the pros and cons around that and just be aware of them. It's not that they're all negative or that you don't want any of these external sources, but you want to be aware of what they entail. um, why are you starting the business, and what is your ultimate goal? And we talked about this, I think, last year at the climate week. It's a question that I think is maybe not posed enough. Lots of people start small businesses because they want to control their own life. They want to control their work-life balance. They want to control their destiny. A lot of these businesses are started for fun. And so you don't have the same sort of objective as somebody who says, look, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to scale it, I'm going to exit in 5 years, right? That's a very different sort of objective and approach than, hey, I want to start a nice little company where I'm the boss. I'm gonna, it's gonna be relaxing and fun and enjoyable. And of course, you want to make money, but maybe that's not, the only goal. So there's different reasons you start a business. There's sort of different types of small businesses, and I think again, not there's no right or wrong here. It's just being aware of what you want to do, and you might change your mind. I mean, I know, worked for a small consulting firm. They did USAID contracting. It was a boutique shop, Institute for Public-Private Partnerships is what I'm talking about, IP3. And they went for 20 years as like a boutique, and the guys were happy and they were doing their thing. But then they made a decision. Okay, we want to sell the company, and they sort of changed their strategy. Say, okay, let's focus on revenue growth, profit growth. Let's reduce our own salaries, and sort of made this a target that, hey, we want to be acquired, we want to exit. And so after like 20 years, they really spent 5 years growing revenue, growing profit, and they sold to Tetra Tech. And I think IP3 still exists within Tetra Tech, but that's another great example where, it was a certain type of business for 20 years. And then they said, okay, now we want to exit. We want to hit these metrics. We want to, sell this company. And so it's a different approach. There's different sort of objectives and um, motivations. Uh, let's see if my slides are not okay. There we go. All right. So now we get into grants. Two examples here: the CBE Green Grant for DC and DCSUE small business rebates and financial incentives for investing in green equipment. We're focused on green businesses here, so either green businesses or investments that make your business more green. And so we're looking at a couple of very specific examples. Of course, there are lots of different grants for businesses that are for all businesses, not necessarily for green businesses. And there may be more in DC and what have you. So, just a couple of examples. For all of these, I'm going to say, the best thing to do is just get online and research grants, or talk to your network, talk to WACIF, talk to others about different sources of funding. So these are just a couple of examples available. And for any of these sources of funding, you want to have, I think, a conversation first. I mean, you can look online and see what's available publicly. But before you spend a lot of time on an application process or a proposal, you want to have a sort of frank conversation about, is my business eligible for this? Does it make sense for me to apply? And then you sort of make a decision whether to invest the time and effort. Maryland, we've got several examples here, and these are, not all from the state. Obviously, federal USDA grants for rural programs. State of Maryland has their Energy Administration Solar Grant Program, Clean Energy Grants. And then you've got, specific towns and cities. Tacoma Park here, just one example that has some local grants for green businesses or greening businesses. Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. So, again, depending on your type of business um, and what you're doing, there are lots of different grants available. A lot of these grants and financing programs are, related to physical infrastructure for real estate, for example, upgrading systems and that kind of thing. Which, if you don't own real estate, it may be not eligible, but any company that owns some real estate may be eligible for these. So it's worth looking at, what's available and whether you're going to be eligible. Virginia's got some other programs: environmental assistance program, litter prevention, Virginia Environmental Endowment. So again, just want to check. We don't have local government examples here, but I think Fairfax, Arlington, all the counties have different incentives programs and grant programs that you can look into. So um, not every business is tuned into grant opportunities, but it's a smart business decision. Obviously, if you can get a grant, non-dilutive capital is what we call it in investment banking. So if you can get some cash in the door that's not requiring, a percentage ownership in the company, that's always a good thing. There are, of course, private foundations that offer grants for different types of businesses, especially, disadvantaged businesses. And so here's a few examples you might look at. And these are sort of national level, Walton Family, Lawrence Foundation. Um, I think it's also worth looking at, some of the larger businesses that are in the region, especially if you're in the same sector, right? And even WACIF has a partnership with Capital One. I think for with the Latino Economic Development Corporation. One of those programs was for transitioning federal government workers who are starting businesses. I mean, there's lots of different specific programs. These trying to focus on the green angle here with some of these examples, but there are lots of foundation grants for businesses, not specifically for green businesses, but available for different types of businesses. And again, you've got to check the criteria. Get on Google, get on ChatGPT, ask what you might be eligible for, and do some background. And then again, probably want to reach out and have a conversation before you spend a lot of time on this stuff. Universities are another great source of funding and support for different types of companies, spin outs, from the university, but also businesses in the region or in the ecosystem. These are three companies I've worked for. They're not local, but I've got some knowledge of them because I've worked with them in the past, and really amazing companies. Their IP, their main product, came out of university-backed research, and of course, that's a model that's used in a lot of places. So 374 Water is a technology that turns wastewater sewage essentially into drinking water in seconds. 374 refers to the temperature. You heat sewage up to 374 degrees Celsius, I believe, and then it just breaks it out, breaks into water and ash, mineral ash, um, and great technology developed at Duke. That was with a grant from Gates Foundation. Gates Foundation also supported Appeal Sciences. This is another. All three of these actually are organic chemistry companies. So this is Appeal Sciences. I think they actually started trying to look at new types of solar panels, and I'm guessing they were looking at fruits and trying to understand molecular level of fruits and somehow derive solar panel technology from that. But what they ended up with was a food preservative that's made out of food waste. Very interesting. They've gotten bigger and bigger. People know who they are now. And so that's exciting. Came out of, Gates was just one source of funding. They had support from University of California, Santa Barbara. But that company has become very successful. It's used in Kroger and a lot of other grocery stores now. Strela is also making great progress. I think they're in the Series A now. And this is a sensor that tells you when fruit is ripening. And so they manage the inventory in the grocery stores around that data that they collect on the emissions of the fruit. Ethylene is the gas that apples emit when they're ripening. So these are, this is hard science. This is organic chemistry. But these are some startups I've worked with that came out of universities. There are lots of other examples, and there are lots of facilities at universities. We have lots of universities in DC area. They have all kinds of support services for companies, whether it's a food company or a clothing company or a business consulting or IT company. I mean, there's different, obviously universities have lots of different departments, and so there are lots of different types of support they offer. And so it's worth checking in to see what kind of support you can get from your local university. And then, of course, if you're a student there or a student there, that typically opens up even more resources. But great source to check for support for any business, even big businesses. I know my uncle
I
actually
do
was a
have a
food chem.
question. Yes.
Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Fine.
I
Go
didn't
ahead.
mean to click off. Sorry.
Oh. I was rambling on anyway. So I was just giving an example. My uncle was a food chemist, worked with companies like Mars, and they used Rutgers. This was up in New Jersey. They use Rutgers labs for research and development. So even the big companies do it. So small companies, if you can get access to university support, that's fantastic. Debt financing, SBA loans, very common source. Of course, not necessarily green financing, but they do have a green loan program. USDA programs, again, focused on rural energy. Green banks, including DC's Green Bank. Again, a lot of that's focused on real estate and infrastructure for real estate, and then state revolving funds for water infrastructure. So, again, these are specific green financing tools that we're mentioning here. Lots of other debt facilities and sources of debt for companies of any type. Um, Equity. Try to run through this list fairly quickly, paying attention to the time. I want to hand this over to Jordan on time, but I tried to put down typical sources of equity investment, and this is basic difference, right, between debt and equity. Debt is a loan, right? It's a contract. You have to pay it back. You're paying typically monthly installments, whereas equity is more of a longer term investment. And if those guys are going to get paid back, it's dividends over time, which aren't necessarily, I mean, equity investors can be more patient, right, than debt. So they know you have to get the business started up and going, or you're investing in expansion. So they're willing to wait a little while to get a return. Of course, they're going to want a higher return typically for that reason. But a lot of folks start with friends and family. Of course, everybody says my friends and family don't have any money. But sometimes you're surprised when people see that you're committed to something, you're throwing your heart into it. Support comes from surprising sources sometimes. So it's where these days on social media, everybody knows what everybody's doing, right? So you don't necessarily have to tell people, but as people see what you're doing, they may want to support you, and you can get some funding that way. Angel investors are essentially the next step, very similar but a little more structured, right? They are going to have a term sheet, they are going to have conditions. Hopefully, these guys, I mean, hopefully, all your investors are adding value, right? They're not just giving money, but they're bringing in, helping you with your process, with your operations, helping to bring in new clients or customers. That's what you really want from investors, not just the cash. Venture capital, we talked about this on some previous events. Not for everyone. Um, Especially the Silicon Valley model is really about software, and it's really about scaling very quickly. So if you're not in software, probably not a good fit. I mean, there's other types of venture capital. Boston is known for life sciences investing, pharmaceuticals, essentially different type of scenario. Um, but I think, as you look at some of these sources, it may prompt you to think about stuff. So venture capital, of course, loves IP, intellectual property. They want you to own some kind of, software process. And so it prompts, I think some consideration of, well, wait, maybe I can have some IP. So we talk to people who are selling some product, selling if it's a food product, if it's a cream, if it's a clothing, maybe you hadn't thought of it before, but there is an opportunity to get some patents, to get some copyright, and those become assets for the company, right? That becomes a value, and it also means people can't copy you because you own the intellectual property there. So again, as you look at these sources and what investors want, it can help you structure your company or make some decisions about it. Lots of impact investors and social VCs out there. They all have very specific criteria. They all have very sort of specific areas they're focused on. So again, I think you've got to do your research and find out, where you fit, where, which investors are looking for you, right? Instead of trying to be what the investor wants, find the investor that's looking for you. Um, and that's easier these days, right? You get on Google, you get on ChatGPT, and you say, who wants to invest in whatever it is, a woman-owned clothing shop in DC, and hopefully you get some quick answers, and then you start the process there. Strategic corporates, I already mentioned, sort of looking at big companies in the area. Xylem, for example, is focused on water technologies. They have a corporate venture capital arm. Most of the big companies have some kind of corporate venture capital arm. So if you know a big company in the area that's doing what you're doing or in the same industry, I think it's worth taking a look at what they how they support. Or they may have a strategic supplier program or sort of mentoring program, which is more not necessarily tied to financing, but also business. So you're looking at sort of both at the same time. And then equity crowdfunding. I do want to make a point here. I worked with InfraShares, which is a crowdfunding. It was started for infrastructure projects, and I sort of convinced them to do infrastructure related startups. My experience there, it really is that this is a platform. There was, I guess, my assumption. I think most people's assumption up front is that, hey, you put your company up there on the platform and you wait for the money to come in, and that's not a recipe for success typically. It's a platform, which means you've got to bring people to it. So the most successful campaigns not only put the company on the platform, but also have a marketing campaign to go with that. Or you already have a network, like your alumni association or your group or your neighborhood, whatever it is. And so the crowdfunding platform is helping you organize all these small investments. And that's really where it's providing a value. Even the big ones like Start Engine, um, I think their success rate's like 30%. So even with a huge national brand, you put the company up there, and I think they have more, some criteria you have to hurdles you have to across to even get listed there. The success rate there's still only 30%. So you've got to bring essentially your own investors to some of these platforms.